Hello, welcome to Security, Cryptography, whatever. I'm Deirdre.
I'm David.
And we have a very special day. Our guest, Steve Weis. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Awesome. We invited Steve on today because there was a little bit of discussion prompted by an e-print that went on the internet that we're not going to describe and we're not going to link to because it's hella broken. But it was an interesting claim in their abstract or the beginning or whatever that their crypto system proved that P does not equal NP because their crypto algorithm was correct, but it turns out it was not correct. But even if it was correct, it would be interesting to claim that your crypto system proved that P does not equal NP. And this led to an interesting conversation in some of our little cryptography nerd circles about like computational complexity, hardness of cryptographic problems. What the hell do we base our assumptions and understanding of the security and hardness of cryptography that we design in general? Reduction, like all these things. And we realized that we never really talked about these things kind of in a little box and that there was sufficient discussion and questioning in a well-informed cryptographic circle that we wanted to talk to somebody about it. And Steve did a PhD in cryptography, and so did David. And so now I've invited them on to ask them questions about, just to put on the record some of these questions. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve?
Yeah, my name is Steve Weis, and I'm currently a software engineer at a company called Databricks. And yeah, I did do a PhD in cryptography, but I would probably describe myself as a lapsed cryptographer. That I have not been practicing in a while, but I can read papers and parse through them and understand what's going on.
Cool, thanks. And David worked on TLS, right?
Yeah, I did remarkably little math during my PhD, so we're going to lean on Steve a lot here.
Okay. So, Steve, can you give us like an intro to like why the kind of broad statement that I have a crypto system, therefore P does not equal NP, just kind of jumps off the page as like, whoa there. What are you talking about?
Well, the irony of this paper is that the scheme is completely just broken. It's, you look at it, it's not even semantically secure the way we would describe it. But in all that mess, they do make a statement that if we could show that a crypto system exists, that would prove that P does not equal NP. Because if P equaled NP, you would not be able to have cryptography as we know it.
Okay.
You would not be able to have cryptography based on hard problems and, the assumptions that you need to have symmetric cryptography.
That's interesting because one, we have crypto systems, right, that are not considered hella broken. That's why we rely on them. So ignoring this paper, say we just have regular schmegular elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman and ignore the presence of quantum computers that blah, blah, blah. So first, for a general audience, what is P? What is NP, and why do they not equal each other?
Great question. And, I think that this is probably going to not do justice for like a general audience right now, but P, very broadly is the set of problems that we know are computable with polynomial time computers, and they can use randomness. There's some different variations about what they are, but P is basically what we know how to compute. NP is the set of things that we know how to check in polynomial time. So I might have a problem where I can't find the answer, but I can validate an answer in polynomial time. So this leads to a big question of whether these are the same. And the field is called computational complexity. And these are just two of many, many different what are called complexity classes. So we have P, NP, BPP, BQP, P space, goes on and on and on. You can dig into this and it can kind of be fascinating. And they all have different assumptions that are basically like, given a machine that can do this, and then, can you decide this? And often people will call these languages, like, they're languages in these complexity classes. So big, long, outstanding problem in computer science is whether P is equal to NP. And, a classical NP complete problem, what that means is that you could reduce other problems in the space to it, is called reset. That's satisfiability with these terms that have three terms in it. And the idea is basically you can write a circuit using these 3-sat terms, a general circuit, and I can plug in an input, and the problem you're trying to solve is whether it has a satisfiable input. And if you can do that, then you can actually kind of do a search to find the input that satisfies it. So I can set up something, say, I don't know the answer. Here's the problem. Can I find an answer? And it'll actually generate an answer. Mm-hmm. So, kind of really roughly in the cryptography world, like that answer could be the secret key. Like I could set up a SAT problem that says, find me a value that, or is this satisfiable that there's a value that would decrypt this thing to this known plain text? Mm-hmm. And you can crank that through and do basically search and find the solution, which would be the key that would satisfy that problem. And that's when, that's why when I say that, like, if P equaled NP, cryptography wouldn't exist. Like we would be in this world where not just that, but all sorts of other things would be, implied. Like if you could write a checkable statement, you can find a solution for it. So it's kind of like certain parts of math are now like automated. If you could write down a problem, you can solve it. With a lot of caveats. So, don't quote me on that.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we deploy crypto systems that are reduced to the 3-sat problem? If it sounds so, this NP complete problem, blah, 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 sounds pretty neat and secure, right?
I think this is an interesting thing, is that when it comes to public key crypto, we have it reduced to problems that are not NP complete or not known to be NP complete. Factoring,
right.
Finding a discrete log problem. Tomorrow somebody might be the next, Andrew Wiles and come out of their basement and say, I have a new factoring algorithm and it's poly time. And we'd be like, all right, throw an RSA, but it doesn't collapse like the polynomial hierarchy or prove that P equals NP.
Right.
And we know that these problems that we mentioned are solvable in a different computation model. Like we mentioned, put aside quantum in the beginning, but we know how to solve these if we have a quantum computer, which we don't have one that can actually run on these yet. So it's a great question. And the reason these problems were chosen is it's easy to find hard, or what we think are hard instances of them in like an average case. So we can basically sample from a bunch of different, RSA moduluses, and like they're mostly hard to factor.
Got it. So to do one step back, we just said that we base cryptography systems or crypto systems that reduce to these hard mathematical problems. We just mentioned factoring. We just mentioned discrete log, which is elliptic curves, and the prior generation before elliptic curves. And like, say you based a crypto system on 3-sat, you would reduce to 3-sat. There's more to a crypto system than just factor, right? So when we say we reduce to one of these computational problems, what do we mean by that?
That's a great question. It's probably like a term that not everyone is familiar with. And the idea is that, let's say I have RSA and I have a black box that can basically solve RSA. It doesn't necessarily need to spit out the factors, but, we can talk about what this means in a minute. But, let's say we have a black box that can distinguish RSA encryptions, or that can give you some advantage in guessing, the content of an RSA ciphertext. If we have that, we can use that black box, which we may not even know what's inside of it. We can use that to factor numbers, because we would just put those numbers as an RSA modulus and then run it through this thing. And then we could basically iterate on this and get out a factor. It doesn't necessarily work the other way around, that if we had a black box that could factor, well, it does in this case, but it doesn't necessarily always work the other way around with this problem. Okay. I might have this backwards, actually. So,
so that kind of putting a little black box around an oracle that says I can distinguish between the thing that we call in the security proof game model of trying to model the thing you're trying to build, a crypto system that has specific properties, say encryption and decryption, and you're trying to construct a mind game, a theoretical game, and what you think an adversary can do and how it interacts with your crypto system, your encryption decryption scheme or whatever. And when we say that we have some like a little black box that says I can distinguish between different, RSA encrypted or factor-based encrypted ciphertext, we're saying that in that game, the adversary or anyone else has a way to distinguish between these things and use that when interacting with encryption and decryption, however it likes. And often what we do when we construct these sort of security games is we kind of do I forget the name of it, but the reverse, saying that say you can factor, say you can have a black box that distinguishes between these different factoring-based ciphertexts, then it means that the adversary can determine which one is encrypted by you and which one is encrypted by David, or, whatever. It breaks encryption. But then you've shown, basically by showing that it must rely on being able to distinguish, you must rely on being able to break factoring. You're saying that the whole crypto system and encryption and decryption relies on factoring being hard. If the adversary cannot factor, then your encryption and decryption crypto system is secure, at least in this very limited game space. So that's kind of the big context of the security of encryption and decryption reduces to the factoring problem or whatever. It's because we have done all this work to construct this hypothetical and try to model all these pieces of how this works and shown a security proof, literally kind of a math proof like you might do in geometry class, at least the way I did in geometry class many years ago, that says, if this thing is true, then everything else about my proof will hold, and the inverse will also hold. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that, we should probably talk about when we say these games too, because when kind of in the public, you think about breaking a crypto system, you think about, okay, I can just decrypt and get the ciphertext out. And these proofs give the adversary like a lot of power by making it as easy as possible. So, an example one is indistinguishability of a chosen plaintext attack. I take two plaintexts, I encrypt them both, and then I flip a coin and I give you one of the two. And if you could even get any advantage in telling me which one of the two, you've broken the crypto system. You're not actually decrypting it. It's like, okay, this one looks like an encryption of 0. I have 0.0001 advantage. I win. So we basically make the game as easy as possible, and we want to give the adversary as much power as possible. And in that case, if there's a black box that can do this with, let's say, RSA, you could use that same black box two-factor. I could take an arbitrary number and make it into an instance of an RSA modulus and then plug it into this thing. And that's the idea, is that if somebody, we don't know how it works, there's just some algorithm that can solve this. We don't know what's going on inside of it, but it runs in polynomial time. I can use that thing to solve this problem that a bunch of smart people haven't figured out how to solve. So that's really what it comes down to. And that's kind of like the best we have. And that's in the public key world. In the symmetric world, we don't even really have that. Like the symmetric world is just, we get a bunch of Belgians to work on something and then they put it up on the internet for a few years. And then in 5 years, we declare, all right, no one's broken this. Let's pick the fastest scheme from the Belgians or whoever's winning it that year.
Yeah, that's not the reason that I'm not super into symmetric, but it's also like this feels a bit woozy and wibbly, whereas asymmetric crypto, I kind of like the structure more, and I kind of like the provability notions more, but that's just me.
In asymmetric, you're basically saying, like, if I have a black box that can do anything from like distinguish ciphertext to fully decrypt things, then therefore I could use it to also quickly solve this problem that we think is hard. Therefore, because we think this problem is hard, this black box must not exist.
Yeah, and like I said, like we usually try to make these games like as easy as possible. We're not like recover the entire plain text and give me exactly what's encrypted. It's like, okay, there's two distributions of output. Like, can you tell the difference between these distributions? And can you do it probabilistically? So you don't have to win every time. You just need to win a little better than flipping a coin. And if you could do that, we consider the crypto system broken. So like, the idea is that you make the game easy, you give the attacker as much power as you can, and then that determines your level of security. And there's different flavors. Like you might give the attacker the ability to decrypt from an oracle, except for the challenge thing. So that's, adaptive chosen ciphertext. Like that's a stronger security model than the first one we talked about, which is chosen plaintext. So this comes up a lot in like the zero knowledge proof world, where there's all sorts of different powers that an attacker could have. They could be in a model where concurrency is allowed, where they can reset the parties in this thing. And that one is strictly like they're basically showing that between a simulation and a real transcript, the attacker can't tell them apart. And so in that world, the attacker might have the ability to reset the real transcript midway through. And like if they could do that a bunch of times, and then, they get a real sample of that, can they distinguish that from something you could simulate yourselves?
Mm-hmm. We talked about kind of security games, and this is like a way to do security proofs to try to model both the capabilities of an adversary, the environment that it's operating in, and then the scheme that you're trying to establish some sort of security property about. There's the standard model. I still don't really know what the standard model is. Then this is not the physics standard model. This is just sort of like the barest bones standard model for security proofs. There's also the random oracle model. And it's funny because I see it so many places in security proofs that are just sort of like, if random oracles exist and we can model them like so, then all of these things are secure. And then at the same time, someone will chime in and be like, it is absurd that we've decided that having the random oracle model is fine. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, first off, standard model in my mind, I think it's just these math problem assumptions. So discrete log, if you're just assuming discrete log and that it's hard to distinguish, or, it's, computational diffie element, like these things are kind of like these well assumed assumptions. All and then, when it comes to random oracle model, the idea here is that when you're doing these protocols, you want to basically have, something that you give it an input and it deterministically returns a specific output. And you kind of assume that, and that you can build different protocols off of. And in practice, you would drop in, hash function, HMAC, whatever, you can implement that. So this is, great. It makes proofs simpler because you can kind of say, you have this oracle, you call it, and it gives us back a random thing. It's not predictable. Great. So I guess in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a result. I want to say it's Ron Kennedy, but I might be wrong. They basically showed a construction that is secure in the random oracle model, which was not secure because it was constructed in a way so that when you implemented it, it actually let you break the protocol. And it was a really artificial construction. So the reason why people are still using it today, kind of without a lot of justification, is that it's hard to actually come up with that artificial construction. Like you had to actually really think and come up with a really tricky way to do this artificial construction. So the result of that was yes, in the random oracle model, just because you proved it there, it doesn't actually prove it secure, but it kind of gets hand waved away as okay, we have people using it naturally, which is you're not constructing it on there. That paper is kind of over my head. I remember that I was early in grad school when that came out, and I tried to read it, and I still am hand waving how it works. But that was a really interesting one because it really, showed that this thing that seemed like a really natural assumption, you're like, let's, storm this thing, we drop in an HMAC or hash function and it'll just work, and it doesn't.
So one thing that I kind of blew my mind early in my cryptography journey was the fact that so many things that we reduce these problems to, these crypto systems to, so we reduce to factoring, discrete log, or, some of these new theoretically post-quantum assumptions. We do all these security proofs. We say we're in the random oracle model, the standard model, or, whatever. We do all this, scaffolding to prove all of these, we give so many powers to the adversary, and we're very conservative about the security property we're trying to prove. And we make all these long proofs, and we make these implementations, and they're both very fast, and they live for years, and they seem really, really bulletproof if you do all these things well. But at the end of the day, it reduces to a problem like discrete log or factoring or whatever, and we don't have a proof that it is in NP or whatever. It's not one of these NP complete problems. And we don't have any sort of proof or solid foundation that it is a secure problem. It's just, if it is a hard problem, then our crypto systems are secure. But it's all based on we think it is. We do not have results that show it is, and it hasn't broken yet. So let's keep going with it.
Yeah, pretty much.
We know it's not NP complete, right? Actually, we know that it's not. Because we have algorithms for it. They're just not, just still bad. It's just not officially like NP complete.
Right. And like even that was like, so even if it's not NP complete, fine, whatever. We don't have for RSA, for factoring, for discrete log, we don't have any result that says it is at least this hard to solve these problems without a trapdoor solution, without a key or already knowing the answer or whatever. And like, what the hell, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it all comes down to is smart people have worked on this for a long time, and we know the best that we can come up with, and that's how hard it is. And like, we have this notion of concrete security where you basically plug in the parameters to the best known algorithm we have, and that gives you your level of security. And like, if somebody comes out with a better algorithm tomorrow, you just rerun the numbers with the new algorithm, and that's the new level of security. And that's happened. That's happened, with some of the pairing-based signatures where, oh, there's a new attack. This one's out. Get a new one. We're going to bump the key length. And that's what we have. Lattices have a little bit stronger basis because they reduce to a problem that is known to be NP hard. And it's not known to be solvable by these quantum computers. And that's why a lot of the post-quantum crypto is all based on lattices or similar problems that are outside that gray area. So yeah, we do have stronger assumptions of what we can build things on.
Yeah, I would counter that lattices are attractive independent of that result, which is that they are very efficient to compute because of all this linear algebra that you just have to do and that sort of thing. You can do a lot of things with them, fully homomorphic, blah, 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 blah. And then having the icing on the cake, which is you don't have it for any of these other problems that we reduce to we've been building real crypto systems on, is this worst case result for shortest vector problem. Is that the one?
Yeah.
And then, okay.
So yeah, that was the big leap, was reducing that hard short vector problem, which we, have a worst case NP hardness for, and you can reduce that to a average case hardness problem. And then that average case is one that we can sample lots of instances of and basically use to build crypto systems out of.
Is that learning with errors?
Learning with errors is one of them. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. That's wild. So can you explain a little bit what it means that the worst case instance of a problem is NP hard versus the average case?
Yeah. So, there was this result in 96 by Aitai, which was the kind of the one that kicked this off. And one of the first lattice-based crypto systems was based on this. And that was a reduction of what's called the short integer solution to this shortest vector problem. Shortest vector problem, meaning that if you could solve this average case hard short integer solution, you could solve this worst case hard shortest vector problem, which is known to be NP hard. So if I had this, the examples, if I had a black box that could solve this shortest integer solution problem, I could take an input that would be an instance of a hard instance of the shortest vector problem and solve it with that black box. That's my understanding.
And we basically don't have anything like that for discrete log. I don't know about factoring, but basically it's just a smooth distribution. We don't have any of these like reductions.
Yeah, I can't take like one of these hard shortest vector problems and map it into a factoring problem. Like I don't think that, I think that's what's missing there is we can't solve, lattice problems with factoring. Can't solve discrete log with factoring.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We've gone pretty deep into the complexity hole and these worst case, average case solutions. So kind of unwinding the stack a little bit. All right, we know about reductions to hard problems. What's a hard problem? Cryptography that we actually deployed isn't actually built on like NP hard stuff or NP complete stuff for the most part. So going back to kind of the top, why is it kind of funny that if someone says, my crypto system is secure, therefore P does not equal NP?
I mean, if you could prove it was secure in our definition secure, then you'd be proving that P does not equal NP. Like we don't know if cryptography exists. That's where we're at today. Like we all might just be making this up and tomorrow we're all out of a job.
I mean, it kind of sounds that way. And yet the next step is that we we pick our security parameters and we consider things to be secure because people keep trying to break them and they haven't yet, or they try to attack the hard problem underneath and they haven't yet. There are different instances of crypto systems that are different but reduce in their security proof to the same hard problem, and one might be broken and one might not.
Yeah.
For different reasons.
In reality, like almost everyone suspects and believes that there's evidence that P does not equal NP. Like nobody is really expecting P to be NP. Like it could happen, but almost everyone is kind of assuming, P doesn't equal NP. And
I think some people expect it to be like undecidable as well, that like it's, despite the fact that it sounds like a very well-formed question, that it's not actually a well-formed question.
Yeah, and there may be like refinements, and these things get very, there's a lot of different like little tweaked complexity classes and tons of different ways you can formulate this, because you're just basically making up like a language and saying, okay, this is the class that belongs to it. Then you can put all, constant depth circuits, you can do logarithmic depth things, and that's its own like class. I think one interesting thing to call out is that there may be a world that exists where we have like symmetric encryption, but not today's public key encryption.
Interesting.
And this kind of comes up in some of the papers talking about this, and people call it mini crypt is the world where we would just have one-way functions. And the cool part is that if we have one-way functions, then we can build a lot of stuff on top of that. We may not have the world where basically like RSA and discrete log get solvable and are shown to be NP or, some approximation of that. There may still be cryptography in that world. Like we can have things based on one-way functions. And that's kind of where we have good evidence that we're at least in that mini crypt world. But this is all best guess.
Okay. A lot of what we've just talked about is besides the quantum computers, it's very proofs and complexity classes and theoretical and, average case, worst case, blah, blah, blah. How about 10 years from now and I have a much more powerful computer? Just presume that Moore's law continues. Just pretend it's not, but just pretend it just continues. And I just have a way more powerful computer and I decide to try to factor RSA 2048 or 4096 or, an elliptic curve group of 256 bits or, whatever. I bet you my same algorithm, I'm implemented in Python, say, like super dumb Python or whatever. It's going to run faster on my 10-year, better computer against the same crypto system and parameter set than it does today. How does that relate to polynomial time and non-polynomial time attacks against my crypto system? Because one of them is going faster than the other and nothing changed except my computer got better.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at it this way. So let's take RSA, for example. There's this team that's based out of France, and they run this algorithm called Cato NFS.
Number filsive.
But anyway, they've been setting the records for factoring, and that's the implementation. That's not the team name. And it's a number field sieve. That's basically the fastest implementation. And every couple of years, they'll spin up like thousands of servers and crank them and find like the next, RSA challenge that it's been sitting out there for a while. And, if you think about how computers get faster, let's say they, double in speed every year. It may not be happening, but let's approximate Moore's law. So you think about that basically burns off like a bit of your key every year. And the algorithm may get better. Their implementation may get better as well. So you might be burning off like more bits each year. And, you kind of look at their track record, and they're making like, steady progress of bumping up higher and higher in what they're able to factor. It's been a couple of years now, but they have their records online. But yeah, there's progress going on there. And, I think to get back to your original point is like, let's say we don't have any big discovery of like a polytime algorithm to factor RSA, or that we don't, have some complexity result, that we're just getting better, best effort of what we have today. Just because it may be exponential doesn't mean that it's like impossible. So I think with RSA, especially, like it's not inconceivable that RSA 1024 will be factored within my career. Like I wouldn't be surprised if somebody does that. And I feel like today we're at a point where you can throw a lot of money at it and do it. So yeah, these things are constantly getting kind of chipped away by the state of the art of actual hardware and implementations, and also just people discovering better algorithms. Like they're might find faster ways to do this. And, it could always very well end up be that we never have like a polytime way to do it, but we maybe have like something that is, exponential that is growing very slowly.
So in that world, kind of the real world with actually implemented attacks on real hardware and, the variables are changing. I have access to either a much more powerful single computer. I have access to lots of compute. I farm out my algorithm across lots of compute that I buy from Jeff Bezos or whomever. In that world, do we still quote care about polynomial time parameterized by a security parameter? Or is it more just I can implement an algorithm and then execute it against this parameter set and it is getting faster, but like the inputs are not just algorithm security parameter, it's that with hardware, with scale up, with, the latest and greatest, TSMC microarchitecture, whatever. Like in the concrete world, do we care anymore about complexity classes?
I mean, I think in the concrete world, we will take the best known attacks and plug the parameters in there. And that kind of tells us how secure it is. I think that's kind of the best we have for a lot of these cases.
Yeah. Okay.
Surprisingly, I haven't seen that kind of like analysis of symmetric primitives. Like, I don't know what the best attacks are other than just brute forcing, and maybe there's some smarter things to do. But at least in the, factoring side and discrete log side, this is to me like the way that you would kind of like back out your security parameters. Because there were some improvements in discrete log about 10 years ago or something. I'm kind of like refreshing my memory on it, but it was had a funny name. I'm forgetting it right now.
In terms of the concrete world, we talked about proofs and games and models and standard model, random oracle model, and there's a bunch of other, security game models that we didn't even mention.
And how cryptography might not exist. But we know in one case that it does in fact exist. It's just really stupid. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so I mean, one-time pads, they will exist. Like they're information theoretically secure, and that will exist even if P equals NP. And you just have to ship a key to somebody that's as long as your plain text. And so you can also think of like code books kind of like this too. Like we may pre-agree that like, if I do two lights, it means one something and one light means another something. And like observing that's not going to let you break it unless you know what's in the code book. So that's basically the world we'd be in, where like everybody has code books and they're sending couriers around, and we're basically like Johnny Mnemonic world or something.
And can you explain informationally theoretically secure? Because that's not a thing we have for basically anything that we have actually deployed.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's that the ciphertext could conceivably be any value. Like it could be encryption at any value. And there's no like, I'm probably completely butchering this, but like my stale understanding of it is that there's any possible key and plain text combination could produce that result, which is basically, you're just XORing things together. So like, there's no way to know that you've actually broken it unless there's other kind of like auxiliary info there. So if you're like, I've completely butchered that.
That's fine. No, that's good. So why don't we use this very cool informationally theoretically secure crypto system in our real world? This sounds really neat.
I mean, every 3 months, somebody out there puts out something saying they're doing one-time pads. And it comes down to like, you have to ship your key material around. And so it's like chicken and egg. Is like, you've never met somebody before. They're over on the other side of the world. How do you get a disk drive full of bits to them? And like literally you'd be taking physical material around because you can't send it to them. I mean, let's say this is the world where P equals NP. Like I want to communicate with somebody. I can't do any sort of identity over the internet because
Mm,
Signatures don't exist. There's no way for me to prove who I am over the internet except by physical properties. So
mhm.
something I possess, something you possess. And, we're in this world, like there's not even any like symmetric encryption. Like we would just basically be able to do one-time pads and have code books. So I would have to send you some binder, and then you go to a page and like I send you a picture of like a frog and you're like, oh, that's a frog. Like, what is it? And that is obviously subject to like, analysis too. Like if I keep sending you
Mhm.
pictures of frogs every day, somebody's going to figure out what that means.
Mhm.
So this
Or you
is,
say good
that,
morning at the beginning of every message or whatever.
I mean, this is basically like all we would have in that model.
So basically, it is very hard to do well in practice, not because the fundamental properties of the crypto system are unattractive or even inefficient. It's the humans doing the cryptography that have the problem here.
Yeah, you have to send someone a secret key that is as long as the plain text. And if you can secretly get someone a secret key as long as the plain text, you may as well just send them the plain text,
Yeah.
but secretly, like.
I was going to say something about like, well, what if you have a seed and then you have a counter and then you hash it and then you use, stretching or whatever. But like we leapt into the world where we don't even have those things. So never mind.
You're just describing a symmetric cipher. Like
I know.
a stream cipher.
And then you have
Yeah.
segments of your message and then you encrypt those and then you chain them together in some sort of block mode. And it's like a chain block mode, something like that. Oh, where have I heard about this before? So cool. So yeah, sorry, one-time pad. It doesn't work in practice.
I mean, it's funny how many times you've seen people have shady companies or crypto systems. They're like, this is a one-time pad. And it's like basically generating some stream of thing. And it's like, yeah, it's like a crappy stream cipher.
Yep.
But over and over again, like this has come up. It's gone down a little bit, but for years you like see people saying, oh, this is based on one-time pads, and like same thing over and over.
My theory is that it is a attractive, easy to understand basic security thing. And because they understand it and it comes with informationally, theoretically secure, it sounds really great. And then because they understand that part and it sounds really great, they try to build on it. And it's like, we are literally 75 years past that. Like we're way, way past that. Sorry that you're just getting into the crypto game. That's great, but please don't ship it, please.
I mean, if we think about the properties you need, you have to like have some channel with the person ahead of time, and you can only use it once. So it's basically you're a spy. You give them the book of codes, and they go out in the field, and you rip off a page every day, and that's the one-time pad. Like that's literally why it's called a one-time pad. So, that's what spies did. And they reused them, and they found pads in the garbage, and that's the world we'd be in if he happened to be NP.
It is kind of funny that like, Claude Shannon came up with all the one-time pad theoretical information security stuff, and then was just like, yeah, so clearly it's not possible. Besides this, I've solved it. I'm done. And just like moved on. Didn't go into the rest of the cryptography. It was just like, well, this is as good as it gets.
My work here is done. Bye-bye. Thanks, Claude. No, not really. It would have been interesting if you kept going.
Too busy inventing digital logic as a master's thesis.
Oh my gosh, yeah. One thing that I didn't touch on that's part of like the concrete world is that how about things like side channels? Are there ways to include that in our security proof or security game or our model in some way? And what about things like fault injection, things that kind of start intruding on the model of like a trusted computing base of some sort? Are there ways to model that in the way we reason about our crypto systems and design them and show security? Or is that just sort of like a don't look under the carpet sort of thing?
Yeah, the answer to that is both. It's been historically don't look under the carpet. And yes, there are ways to model it. And,
Okay.
the idea here is that when we set up these, simulations or these game-based proofs, you're basically saying exactly what your adversary can do. You say what its runtime can be, what oracles it has, what it can do with the system, like query it, reset it. And side channels are one of those powers. And so if the proof doesn't capture that, hey, you can get, random bits of memory sampled, or that you can cause an error and cause this thing to abort midway through. And then what does that do to the protocol? So there was a pretty, extensive effort to work on this, and it's called leakage resilient cryptography. And they basically are trying to capture the idea that there'll be some sort of leakage to an attacker. And, I think the challenge there is that side channels are really hard to model because they're almost by definition surprising. Okay, so you define some leakage channel that's bits of memory. Well, okay, what about timing? So then how do you model that for an attacker? So I think it can be done. I think it's going to be hard to really list and model all the different types of side channels an attacker could have in the real world. But yeah, there's been attempts to do this, and surprisingly, you don't see that as kind of a standard security model. I think it just becomes really complicated to prove things in it. That, okay, this is secure, and you might leak, a fifth of your, or a fraction of your memory. You have to probably do things to make it secure that would make it impractical in a lot of practice. So I think in practice, people are all right, you have an isolated compute environment. That's our assumption.
Yeah. There are standard sort of buy-in assumptions that we do in the real world that we can just sort of be assuming you're air gapped, assuming that, whatever, it's not leaking like crazy, or someone doesn't have a fucking microphone up against your computer.
Assuming that all inputs take the same amount of time to process, works pretty well, because that's then something that you can kind of, I won't want to say enforce in code easily, but something that if you bang your head against the wall, you can get most computers to do.
I mean, another thing that comes up too is just composition of these things. You might have two components that are each proven secure in isolation, and then you stick them together and all of a sudden it breaks. So it's Mac before encrypt, encrypt before Mac. Yeah, the order matters. And, the Mac is secure, the encryption is secure, but if you do them in the wrong order, all of a sudden the scheme is not. So that's the other thing too that I think is complicated here, is that, you might have building blocks are all great and you just don't know the magic incantation to put them together, and you do it wrong.
The universal composability model.
That is another one that I tried to read, and I was what is this?
Yeah. Shout out to Rand Canetti.
Yeah, it's 2 for 2 for Rand Canetti today.
We're vaguely laughing because universal composability is this other way that would theoretically be really nice to literally compose schemes together and have a way to show that their properties either compose together nicely or, whatever. But it's a very different kind of way to prove things than, say, game-based security, random oracle model, standard model sort of thing. They're kind of looking at each other but never touching. And so if you write proofs in quote the regular way, or at least what's now the regular way, you don't really write proofs in the universal composability model. They're kind of on other sides of the dance floor. But it would be really nice. Universal composability sounds really great, and then you get into the proofs and you're just ah.
Yeah, this is one of the ones where I remember reading it and not really understanding it, and then kind of put it on the shelf. I know the name and I can refer to it, but I can't do it. I don't really know how it works in the hood.
Yeah.
But I think there's been some work that has revised it and is trying to adapt it. I saw something in the last couple of years that was UC Revisited or something.
Cool. I'm a fan of the newer state separating proofs kind of approach. It's very in the game-based thing, and you do two transitions of games, but instead of kind of everything being in the environment or whatever, or if you're doing, proofs of, knowledge in the simulation or whatever, you can segment these packages and stuff like that. It's very nice if you are a programmer first, or a software engineer first versus a person who's making proofs to model all this crap, blah, blah, blah. But it's brand new. All right. So we talked about a lot.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
All right. Does P equals MP? No. Everything
But
went
yeah, what do you think?
Definitely no for me. But yeah, one of those ones I'd like to be proven wrong, but definitely no for me.
Yeah, I hope not. It would be, I don't want to use the one-time pad. How about that? I hope P does not equal MP because I don't want to have to manage code books and worry about the one-time pad.
I'm just going to retire if it is. Like, I'm done with computers.
Yeah, everything will be broken. Okay, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you all.
All right, bye.
Security, Cryptography, Whatever is a side project from Deirdre Connolly, Thomas Potachik, and David Adrian. Our editor is Nettie Smith. You can find the podcast on Twitter at SCWPod and the hosts on Twitter at Durham Crustulum, at TQBF, and at David C. Adrian. You can buy merchandise at merch.securitycryptographywhatever.com. Thank you for listening.